Um, I titled this program because over the years, growing up, it was such an interesting challenge to watch the reaction that people gave my mother, and I would always go with her different places. So I knew she was kind of special, but I thought everybody's mother was special. So it didn't seem unusual. So that was a real challenge for me growing up, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. I had the distinct pleasure in 1999 of being asked to develop the first African American exhibit for the Oklahoma Historical Society. In 1999, there were more than 500 museums and historical societies around the state of Oklahoma, and not one had a permanent exhibit of the African American experience. So my challenge was to begin the process of educating our community about the importance of keeping important documents, scrapbooks, things that were important to help us to interpret the African American experience in Oklahoma. It is a ongoing challenge because we didn't have examples of museums that had stories about African Americans. So from then until now, 20 years, and we're still discovering stories that have not been told. So it has been a fabulous job. I'm as guilty as anybody else. I tell people all the time that when I talk to them, and if I go someplace and sit down and I'm with one of my elders, I'm thinking all the time, they got a story. How can I find out about it? And I start talking to them, and sure enough, I find out something really interesting about it. And then I would always say, do you have any artifacts that substantiates this story? Give you an example. There was a guy named Walter Prim. He called me one day after I did an interview on the radio station. He said, "Brother Fisher," he said, I got some black history for you. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yep." He said, "My dad was a dairy farmer." I'm thinking to myself, well, it sounds like something to do with cows. And I said, okay. He says he was a grade A dairy farmer. I said, what does that mean? He said, well, they were raising cows to produce milk for consumption. I said, oh. He said, and he was one of only two in Oklahoma at the time. I said, how do you know that? He said it was in a Jet magazine. He said, well, I know because he was my dad, but it was substantiated in more places than one. And I said, okay, tell me the story. So he told me about his dad. I said, well, do you have any artifacts to help document this story? He said, what's an artifact? I said, it's any kind of three-dimensional object that can help us to learn about your dad. He said, well, we still own the property, but we got to rent it out to somebody else at this time. I said, well, let's go up and take a look. And sure enough, we went up to the property, and we walked around, and we took pictures of because if you were a grade A dairy farmer, you had to have a special kind of cement barns for taking care of the cows and that kind of stuff. And so I said, okay, now you told me that he was a grade A dairy farmer and there was no others. Where'd you get that? And so he had the aunt send me the magazine from California. And then they went to the library and looked up, and sure enough, headlines on the front page, Walter Prim, top seller to the Gold Spot Dairy Company. Well, long story short, we took that information and turned it into a small exhibit about his family. The Daily Oklahoman was out one day and saw the exhibit and put it on the front page of the newspaper. So here's a family that had this history all their life, did not think anybody was interested in it, and we turned it in from a little family story and made a big deal out of it. And that's what I've been doing for 20 years, taking these little stories and making a big deal out of it, because we've had some wonderful, wonderful history in Oklahoma. With respect to my mother's story, by the time I got to the Historical Society, I had moved from my house into my mother died in 1995, and for about the first 6 months, I wouldn't even, I was so devastated I wouldn't even hardly go to the house. But eventually I moved there because I decided I wasn't going to sell the house, so I moved into the house. And I remember going through it and I ran across this typewriter. I said, oh yeah, Mom used to use this typewriter all the time, and Mom typed with 2 fingers, this finger and this finger. And I said, yeah, I mean, I could just see her not typing those speeches or typing them. I said, but nobody uses typewriters anymore, and I threw it in the dumpster. And it wasn't until I got to the Historical Society and started this project that I realized that was the dumbest thing that I'd done in a long time. In a long time. And, but it was, but after that, I started thinking, now I've got new responsibility. What do I use to tell her story? And I knew I had in our closet was this big ornate robe that she wore at OU for the commencement programs. So I said, well, I definitely want this in the exhibit. And then I saw a canister in the closet. And I pulled the canister out, and I said, something's in here, and I felt it in my finger, and I slid it out. And I began to try to open it up. It was round, but I kind of careful with it. And when I opened it up, it was her diploma from law school at OU in the closet, apparently in the original canister that they sent it to me. Never been taken out, never put on the wall. And in fact, when at the Historical Society, what we had to do was build a special humidifying device so that it could soak up enough moisture that we could safely let it flatten out on its own to keep it from cracks from developing and so forth. And that's the kind of mom she was. You make a big deal out of what she had done. I remember I was a sophomore at Langston, and she said, I need you to take me to Tulsa to a funeral. I said, okay. So we headed out to Tulsa to the funeral. I didn't ask who the funeral was, just take her to the funeral. And we got to Tulsa, and I remember, there's church and tons of people around. And it was the funeral of a guy named Amos T. Hall. It didn't mean anything to me, but you said Amos T. Hall. And so we were standing outside, the church was, filled up with people, and all of a sudden, this, portly guy was walking on there, and Mama hollered out, "Thurgood." And then I saw him turn around, and he said, "Sip," and gave her a big hug. Well, I knew one thing. I knew who Thurgood Marshall was, and I knew something else, that if anybody called my mother Sip, they must know her really well. I had a class with my mom one time, and I made the mistake of calling her Mama. That was something I didn't repeat again. That didn't happen. So you unless you are a good friend of hers, you refer to her as Dr. Fisher, or Miss Fisher, but never Ada Lois, never Sip, unless you were a very good friend of my mom's. And it was the funeral of Amos T. Hall, who was the resident attorney in my mom's case. That's how I began to know who she really was. Now, 3 years before that, I was a senior at Northeast High School, and this was in the heights of busing, and had all this the friction that in Oklahoma City that resulted from the busing, the Dow case and everything. And so I remember putting stickers on my locker, and there was a vice principal at Northeast at the time, first African-American administrator to be vice principal at Northeast. His name was Melvin Todd, Dr. Melvin Todd. He was vice chancellor of academic affairs at the state, Regents of Higher Education. And he called a bunch of us militants into his office and said, well, what you guys are trying to do can better be accomplished if we have a big program. And it turned out that it's Northeast's first Black History program. And so he said, we need a program. You need a speaker, somebody that knows about African American history, somebody that can motivate the students and share with them information of importance. And he kept looking at me. And I was kept listening to him, and finally I got uncomfortable. I said, well, I don't know anybody like that. And so he laughed and laughed. And so he said, well, here's a number. Call this guy. And he was at OU. I said, okay. So he gave me the phone number, and I called and asked this guy if he would, come be our speaker for this program we're going to do. The guy that I called at that time was no other than Dr. George Henderson. And when he came to the university, came to the Northeast and spoke, I said, wow. I went home and told Mom and Daddy, I said, y'all should have came to that program. This guy named Dr. Henderson was awesome. If you heard him talk, you might do something around here. And so that's how I met Dr. Henderson and became acquainted with him. 1945, my mom graduated from Langston University. And she knew of all of this. She was heavily involved with reading, and during her tenure at Langston, she had snuck into the president's office and called the state representative and complained about the poor conditions at Langston and the fact that they didn't have any sidewalks, and when it rained, it got mud everywhere, and could he come out and take a look at it? And so the president at Langston was not real pleased with what she had done, but that's the kind of lady my mom was. And so when she graduated, the NAACP was in the process of looking for a plaintiff to desegregate, to try to get into University of Oklahoma. They knew they needed somebody that was academically qualified. They needed someone that relatively untouched by threats of losing a job or that kind of thing. And so in Chickasha, there was a medical doctor named W.A.J. Bullock. He was also vice president of the region of the NAACP. And all over the state and all over the nation, they were looking for these plaintiffs because the Thurgood and the Legal Defense Fund were trying to find just the right case, to pursue to the Supreme Court and challenge this desegregation of higher education. And so Bullock came to the house. He said, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to my grandfather, T.B. Sipuel at the time, and my uncle, Lemuel Sipuel. And my uncle had been valedictorian of his class. He had just got back from fighting in World War II. And so he said, I'd like to talk to you about a very important matter. I said, okay. So he came to my grandparents' house in Chickasha, 601 South 1st Street. And he explained to them what they were trying to do and asked my uncle if he would be interested in being the plaintiff. He said, no. He said, I just got back from fighting in this war, and I'm ready to get on with my life now. But he did think being a lawyer was a good idea. But my mom was in the room at the same time. And she said, well, I'll do it. And that's how she became the plaintiff. She also was valedictorian in my class. You see, these Sipuel kids were my grandfather was the bishop of the Church of God in Christ in Oklahoma at a time when there was only one bishop, and it was him. And so he was a very influential guy at that time, and they knew they couldn't threaten him with firing him because he was his own, the church supported him. And so she said, I'll do it, and that's how she became the plaintiff. W.J. Bullock took it to Oklahoma City on 2nd Street, where a guy named Roscoe Dungy, who was the editor of the Black Dispatch newspaper. Now, growing up, Mom always talked about Thurgood Marshall, Amos T. Hall, Roscoe Dungy, and a bunch of other lawyers from around the country. That's what I heard all the time. But it was those three that went to OU to apply for admission, and that's how she became, the plaintiff. That was in 45. Sadly, around May of 45, of 46, around May of 46, my grandfather died, and they didn't know how my mom would react to this. And but because we're 6 months into this deal, and my grandfather died, and so they didn't know how Mom would react to it. I saw a letter that was written from Roscoe Dungy to Thurgood Marshall, and he told Thurgood, he says, now, you've got to hurry up and get this proceedings going. This Sipuel girl she's smart, but she's kind of neurotic, and we need to get this going before something happens to her, because Lord Gaines, this is not the first time that somebody had challenged higher education in Oklahoma and higher education in the nation. There was a guy named Lord Gaines who had challenged it in Missouri. And Lord Gaines, the courts ruled in favor of him also, but he disappeared. And to this day, they don't know what happened to Gaines. So they were concerned about, Mama's, well-being. So, but they went ahead and got the case filed, and they lost in the first court hearing in Norman. They appealed it to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. They lost there. They appealed it then to the United States Supreme Court, and it was in January, and the school was about to be in session. And within 48 hours, the Supreme Court came back with a unanimous decision that basically didn't challenge segregation. It just simply said that you can, have segregation if you want to, but, she has a right to receive a legal education in Oklahoma at the same as anybody else did. So they were faced with a problem. Either provide her a legal education at OU, or nobody gets a legal education at OU. And so, there's a nice picture of Mama getting off the airplane, coming back to Oklahoma after the court decision, and Mama and Thurgood, and then Roscoe Dungy whispered to my mom. He told her, "Be careful with what she says because we got a problem." And so he knew at that point that there was going to be a problem. But Mama said she came home. She thought she was going to enroll at OU. She went to Chickasha, and the next day she got a telegram that said that the Langston University School of Law is just opening up. They were going to provide her a legal education by creating a Langston University Law School at the state capitol, 3 rooms, and she would be the one student, and they call that separate but equal. And Thurgood Marshall said it's not. And they went back to court, again, to prove that was not separate and equal. But in the meantime, that editor of the Black Dispatch newspaper named Roscoe Dungy, he said, "Okay, I got 6 more students coming down here to apply. One in journalism, one in geology, one in physics, he said, "Let me see you build those schools overnight." And so University of Oklahoma basically state regents basically conceded that that wasn't going to work, and George McLaurin became the first African American to be admitted to the University of Oklahoma. And they were real mad at my mom. I guess she real mad at her about that thing, and so they didn't let her in until the next year. They said, "We got a school for you, and as long as it's got funding, then that's where you go." Well, the following in '49, back up a little bit. In '48, when they got ready to, when the funding was about to run out, then she would be eligible to go, but that would then cause her to have to miss out on another semester. So George Cross, who was the president of University of Oklahoma at the time, called the dean of admissions and said, "Let her in." And this was tricky because technically this was a violation of the law, and they could have retaliated against him for doing that, but he said, "Let her in," and then he went fishing, and that's when my mom got in school, but on segregated conditions. In other words, what they did with Miss McLaurin and all the other African American students was they tried to build an artificial separation between them and the rest of the students. In McLaurin's case, they put him out in the hall, but they situated his desk so he could sometimes see the professor depending where he stood. And in my mom's case, what they did was they brought in theater-style seating. They brought all the other students down to the front of the class, and all the way in the back of the classroom was empty chairs, and one chair with a sign over it saying "colored" and a partition thing around the chair. And so Mom said, well, she kind of figured that's where they wanted her to sit, and that's where she started law school, sitting in that colored chair. That colored chair had probably more of an impact on her than the fact that some of her professors were lawyers that fought against her. But that strangely enough, the students, the other men in the law school, Mom said that she would not have survived that first semester at all had it not been for the men in the University of Oklahoma Law School. They took her outside took her under shade trees, shared their notes with her, shared their books with her, and basically ensured that she was going to get all the help that she could get and survive. They had special seating areas. They had segregated seating areas in the student union building where they served the lunches and meals. Again, with the partitions around. In my mom's case, in classroom, the guys would take the colored sign out and throw it out the window and stuff, and they'd have to come put the sign back up. But they were very supportive of my mom. Then Thurgood went back to court and ruled this time, saying once admitted, you cannot treat her differently, any of the students differently. So they won that case, and so that ended the segregation at the University of Oklahoma in higher education. And now, for me, growing up again, I knew nothing about all of that. You know, I just knew Mom made good popcorn balls, and everybody, all those kids like that. And you know what? Even to this day, friends of mine say that they can't imagine, that she was so important, and they never knew that. My dad ruled our household. Warren Fisher was the guy that everybody thought was so important, but and we didn't have the much attention to Black history that we do now. And I remember my mom died in '95, and this was probably in 2002 or 3. I was in Washington D.C. and I went to the Smithsonian Museum, and there was an area that had a display about Thurgood Marshall, and I looked at it and it had that picture of Mom and Thurgood Marshall, and I said, at the Smithsonian? And I looked around, I said, who can I tell? That's my mom. And there was literally no one, that could tell. We made such headway in race relations, that, and I know that basically a lot of people think that we may not have gone fast enough, but it is so much different now than what it was when we were growing up. But I had a display in the African American exhibit, and we were rushing for the first exhibit, and I didn't have time to put interpretation up there. But there were 2 water fountains I had, classic 2 water fountains. One sign said white, and one sign said colored. And I didn't. That's all I had time for interpretation. We had opened the magazine, opened the museum, and so I remember watching kids play with that water fountain, trying to make water come out of it, which wasn't going to happen because no water in the gallery. And they were trying to make water come out of it, so I kind of watched them a little bit, and then they were twisting the handles. And finally, one kid looked at the other and said, "Well, what color is the water supposed to be?" They thought it was supposed to be colored water, So anyway, well, I've got a brief little 6-minute video I'd like to show you now, about my mom. My mom used to always say this little. People always ask her, "Why did you decide to, to do this? You knew there were inherent dangers in this thing. Why did you decide to do it?" And she used to end the talks with a little poem that I think is apropos for her and Dr. Henderson. It says, 2 roads diverged in the yellow wood. Sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, until where it bent in the undergrowth, and then I took the other. Each that morning equally lay, in fields no feet had trodden back. I think I'll save this trail for another day, but as way leads on the way, I knew I'd never be coming back. I shall be telling this story with a sigh, ages and ages whence. 2 roads diverged in the yellow wood, and I took the one least traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
I often think about your mother, my friend, my colleague. Had it not been for her, I would not have been able to go to the University of Oklahoma as a professor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I was asked by the chair of the sociology department to consider coming to Oklahoma to interview for an associate professor position in education and sociology, I must be very honest. I had no intention of coming to Oklahoma to do anything. Why? My father was run out of Alabama by the Ku Klux Klan, and he swore that he would never go back there to live. And listening to him, I kind of just said, if you won't go, Dad, I won't go. Well, obviously, I didn't keep that commitment. But I want to tell you about my perception of individuals who become heroes, sheros, and all of the other honors bestowed upon us that we would never have achieved without the support of other people. When my friend Rosa Parks heard that I was going to take a job in Oklahoma, she made a special visit to the house to talk to Barbara, not me, my wife. And she said, I'm glad that George is going to Oklahoma to teach. And she mentioned Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher. She said, somebody has to finish this job, and why not you? Barbara shared that information, and I thanked Rosa later. I said, but I'm only going to stay for a couple of years. The backstory. When I graduated with a doctorate in educational sociology at Wayne State University in 1965, I was the third African American to receive a doctorate in education, or sociology in the United States, the third. So I had a choice of many schools that I could indeed start my professional career, and Oklahoma was not even on my long list. So you're wondering, how in the world did you end up there? Ada Lois was an intentional volunteer. I was not. I'll be very honest. It was never my decision to come to Oklahoma and do anything except visit, see some Indians, see the football field where Curtis God ran, and go and get a good job someplace, Why do I say that? No man, no husband, no father, a father of 7 children, a wife and a mother-in-law, that man would not, if he had all of his faculties except a $5,000 pay cut to teach in Oklahoma, I was that person. It was never my decision. It was never my decision. Years after I'd been here, I came to the realization that my Creator decided that this is where I should be. That plain, that simple for me. Flying in to Oklahoma from Detroit, when the United Airlines plane crossed the border between Kansas and Oklahoma, I looked down and I saw the red earth. And I said to myself, this is it, this is Oklahoma. And the voice inside of me says, yes, this is it. I thought the voice was confirming that this was Oklahoma. I'm a slow learner. The voice was saying, this is where you're going to be, stupid. I interviewed. I had the largest lecture interview of any professor ever accepting a job at the University of Oklahoma. It wasn't just because I was going to be the third African-American full-time professor at OU. It was because I was coming from Detroit. I was coming from a place that had a race ride. And the Hendersons lived 2 blocks from where the race riding erupted in Detroit. I was assistant to the superintendent of Detroit Public Schools, and I was involved in trying to help put that community back together again. If that riot had occurred a few weeks earlier, I would still be in Detroit or someplace else. It did not. I accepted the job in Oklahoma. Now, I need to tell you about that experience. I was not a voluntary martyr, or voluntary anything. I went back to Detroit after I had agreed that I would indeed take the job. And I said, Barbara, we're going to Oklahoma. You have to know Barbara to really appreciate this part of it. She said, I thought we agreed that you were going as a vacation and then we would seriously visit the other schools. I said, Barbara, we're going to Oklahoma. You'll love it. And then I described the community and the schools. And she asked the question, how much does it pay? I said, you'll love Oklahoma, Barbara. She didn't say anything to me for about a half an hour. She just refused to. She said, how could you do this? We've got children to take care of. We've got my mother, and we've got all of these obligations. You took a $5,000 pay cut? I said, not to worry. Truth be told, if I had had enough faith, I would not have worried, because I should have known the pattern. After every child, something good happened, and I was able to get extra jobs in teaching and consulting and writing to take care of the children. So 7 children was never a problem for us financially because I had other things I should have trusted. $5,000 pay cut, no big deal if I trusted. But so Barbara said, don't ever do that again. If you do that again, I'm going to take you out. I asked her to go to Oklahoma and find a house. She did. She came back with pictures of the house that the Hendersons were going to move in Norman, Oklahoma. Freeze. Norman, Oklahoma was once a sundown town, and the realtors had a legally unenforceable agreement that none of them would sell a house to a Negro. When Sally's Real Estate sold us a house, they broke that covenant. Within a few years, they lost their business. They were, I started to say blackball. No, they were whiteball. None of us had a vote. And so consequently, they're my heroes. Norman, Oklahoma. Wow. We had individuals who 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away, sell their house because they had heard that the blacks are coming. We had garbage thrown on our lawn. I would get up early in the morning and clean it up so that my children didn't have to see it. My car was egged several times, and I didn't know anything about getting eggs off a car, so I used hot water, ruined the paint, right? Yeah. People would drive by our house shouting obscenities and call us everything except children of God. The police would stop me late at night and ask why I was in that neighborhood at that hour. This was kind of routine. We forbade our children from answering the telephone for several months because of the obscene calls. The other side of that is simply this. For every bad thing that happened to us, 2 good things happened. We did something that neither Barbara or I ever had an opportunity to do. It was our moment of truth. I was involved, in the civil rights movement in Detroit. I knew Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Malcolm wanted me to join him, but I was already committed to Martin. That was not an issue. I worked for the Urban League earlier, and Whitney Young Jr. wanted me to join the National Urban League as vice president in charge of national education for the Urban League around the U.S. When I told him about Oklahoma, he says, yeah, you got to go there. And he said, this Ada Lois keeps coming up in my life. She opened that place up, you've got to close the deal. And closing the deal meant that blacks had never owned property in Norman. I asked Whitney, why me? He said, why not you? If not you, who? If not now, when? All of these people are pushing me into being a hero. Before coming up, I remember the first dinner that Barbara and I attended in Oklahoma City. And incidentally, all of the realtors in Norman assumed that the Hendersons were going to live in Oklahoma City, northeast Oklahoma City. Barbara said, I have 7 children. They go to different schools. There's no way I'm going to live in Oklahoma City. We're going to live in Norman, where we are. It's our house. This is our community. So consequently, the meeting in Oklahoma City, the first dinner, I jotted down the names of some of the individuals who were there. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher, Charles and Hannah Atkins, E. Melvin Porter, Ira and Ruby Hall, Jimmy Stewart, Clara Luber, F.D. Moon, Sylvia Lewis, E. Melvin Porter, Russell Perry, Reverend W.K. Jackson, who's who in Oklahoma. They were all there. And I was their professor. It was like the movie, Remember the Titans, where the black coach came to integrate this community and to be, and the members of the black community said, you're our coach. Well, the people in Oklahoma City, the African Americans said, you're our professor. And as I was leaving the dinner, Ada Lois pulled me aside. She said, finish it. I didn't live there. My family didn't live there. Somebody has to do this. We did that. Without Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher opening up the University of Oklahoma, my obituary would not read like this. George Henderson, 3rd full-time African-American professor at the University of Oklahoma, the first African-American to be awarded a distinguished professorship, an endowed professorship. The first African-American at the University of Oklahoma to create a degree program, the Human Relations program. The first African-American dean of a degree-granting college, the College of Liberal Studies. The Henderson Tolson Cultural Center bears my name. The Henderson Scholars, bears the name of Barbara and George Henderson. There's a bench in the Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher Garden with a plaque with George Henderson on it. All of those things happen because somebody opened the door to the community for us, and you already heard who that person was. But I reflect on my very rapid rise, and I have to be very honest. I didn't take time to think about who the real heroes of Black history are and were and will always be. Not those of us who are stage center at activities, not those of us who are inducted into halls of fame, not those of us who get more news and media press than we deserve, but all of the men and the women who looked at us when we were babies and said, this is the one. This is the child that's going to take us out of poverty. That's what my mother said. Sharecropper parents, poor, dirt poor. My mother said, this is the baby. I think all poor mothers, it has nothing to do with race, say that. This baby is our hope. In my mother's case, it was true. First generation off welfare, first generation high school graduate, first generation everything. These are the heroes. These are the individuals who sacrificed working 2, sometimes 3 jobs so that those babies could survive. These were the individuals who were denied their dignity because when they were even adults, they were called boys and girls. They had to say yes, sir, and no, sir, to individuals who were just juveniles because they were of a different color. They were the individuals who lived in places and took their children in places because those are the only places they could live that were too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter, shacks. These were the individuals who somehow managed to survive, as my family did. I grew up with roaches, bed bugs, and rats. My school lunch from 1st grade to 12th grade was a bologna sandwich, an apple or an orange. I preferred a banana. And that was it. I know bologna. I fried it, I broiled it, I eat it raw. Bologna's bologna, it all comes out the same way, but I love it. I absolutely love it. Lessons that I learned. My mother, before my wife, my 2 best friends. My mother is like all of the other mothers, and my father was probably like most of the other fathers. They did the best that they could to survive so that we could amount to something. Neither of my parents graduated from the equivalent of middle school. The only book that I ever had in my house when I was growing up was the Bible. No other books. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher made it possible for me to go to a university, to achieve awards and honors and all of the other things that I could never have done without the help of multicultural, multiracial allies. The first civil rights movement on college campuses in Oklahoma occurred at the University of Oklahoma, and Melvin B. Tolson Jr. and I, and incidentally, Melvin B. Tolson Jr., my best friend. His father was, some of you may know, an internationally renowned poet. He was the subject of the great debaters. It was his kids doing that. It was his son who was my best friend. We were the advisors to the black students who organized the Afro-American Student Union. And they protested racial segregation and discrimination on the Norman campus. And that rebellion spread throughout the colleges of Oklahoma. They came to our campus to see how we did and what we did in terms of strategies. They came from Langston, Oklahoma State, Northeastern, Northwestern, Central Oklahoma. They came from all over, the black students, to learn about how you indeed have a successful civil rights movement and break down the barriers of racial segregation and discrimination. And we had workshops. One of our speakers, Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher, so almost as if I was following her or she was following me. We were shadowing. We were very good friends. I'll never forget one workshop that she gave. She said, if you are not willing to stand up for what you believe in, then why even get up in the morning? If you don't believe in a cause greater than yourself, then what is your education worth? And I remember my mother saying, George, with all of your degrees, I pray that you never be an educated fool. Someone who thinks that you're better than the rest of us because you have those degrees. And I remembered that, and I never forgot it. They sacrificed their education so that I could get mine. These are their heroes. You read about us, some of us, in books, and you see our pictures somewhere, and the true heroes are the individuals who made the sacrifices for us. my mother taught me, and then I'll close so that we can have some time, maybe for a minute, a question or two. My mother taught me to love and accept all people. And she did this in a very, very dramatic way. When I was about 9 years old, my mother called me aside. She said, "George, you run with the devil 6 days a week. Sunday you're going to church. This is not a discussion. Get ready, son. Tomorrow you're there." My mother was my first social secretary. All the girls were there. So I spent maybe half a year chasing girls. And then when I settled down and started listening to my pastor, I remember the sermon, God is love, period. Not hate, not indifference, not bigotry, not any of those other things happening outside these walls. He said, if we cannot love one another, then surely we will die hating one another. I chose love, he said, and I finally did too. The telling moment for me was this. In terms of love, I had to first love my friends. We rarely had meat to eat, and we had a chicken. I remember that meal. One little chicken. And my friends were visiting, and close to dinner time, I said to them, four of my friends, I said, "I thought I heard your mother calling you." I wanted them gone. I didn't want to even ask them if they would stay for dinner. My mother called me aside, and she said, "Don't you ever do that. We're all poor in this community, and what little we have, we share with our friends and strangers if they're here." My mother taught me to share. And when I indeed started doing very hateful things in terms of calling white boys names, she said, "You don't do that. We don't do that." Good gracious. And she didn't have a college degree. She didn't have a diploma. She had a heart full of love. My students at the University of Oklahoma, those were the heroes. The first African American history course taught to Norman High School students were taught by 12 white students. They knew more black history than most of the black students at the University of Oklahoma because they did their homework. Don't tell me that you have to be one in order to teach one or help one. I learned that lesson. They taught me. The final lesson, not the final, but one of the lessons that I want to share with you is this. Rosie Katz was one of the most energetic, one of the most active students that I've ever known. She came from a very rich part of Dallas. Her father called her home one day and said, "I heard that you're involved in that civil rights stuff. I didn't send you to Oklahoma to do that. If you continue to do that, I'm going to take you out of my will." And she said, "Daddy, take me out of the will. I'm not stopping." She was an only child. She knew he wasn't going to do that. So Rosie was a very active student. The library bar is where I would meet with a cadre of students at the beginning of every fall. No books in that library, but lots of other things that would kind of enlighten you. I remember getting there first, and I was eating in my hamburger, and Rosie came in, the place was packed, and she yelled at the front door, "Dr. Henderson," and she ran over to me. "We're going to start another semester." And she leaned down and she kissed me on the cheek. And I stopped eating, a place full of white guys, watching this white female kiss me, and I said, "Rosie, what will they think?" She said, "The kiss was for you, not for them. The question is, what do you think?" Love, acceptance, friendship goes beyond the skin. My students taught me those things. They're the heroes. And the final hero was a 12-year-old male. Doorbell rings at 2616 Osborne Drive, the Henderson household. young white male standing there, 12 years old. I opened the door. I said, I paid for the paper last week, closed the door. Doorbell rings, same kid standing there. Mr. Henderson, I'm not your paper boy. I've come to take me to a movie. I was frozen in time. White boy taking my daughter to a movie. I didn't speak for what seemed like 2 days. It was only about 15 seconds. And when I gathered myself, I said, I teach that stuff at the university. We don't live it in this house. I did something that was very foolish. When I was courting Barbara, I said, honey, we're going to have a democracy. We're going to be a democratic family. We're going to vote on things. 6 daughters and 1 son later, I have never won a vote. I should have declared a dictatorship. I should have, well, anyhow. Faith Elaine says, Dad, she called a family meeting, which is around the dining room table. She said, you've taught us to judge people by the quality of their character, not the color of their skin. Didn't you believe all that stuff that you were teaching us? And I said, I never had a chance to live it. She said, we do, let us. 7 grandchildren, 2 grandchildren later, 3/4 of them are multiracial. The Hendersons live it. These are the heroes. These are the individuals who indeed sacrificed or were our conscience. Maybe what I came to say is that when you think of Black history or Native American history or Chicano or Hispanic history or any other kinds of history, just remember that all of us are America. And those histories are about us, all of us. We're just a piece of it. A small piece, and you put all those pieces together and you have the total gestalt, and it's beautiful. I never had a chance to live in a predominantly white neighborhood before coming to Norman, Oklahoma. I never had an interaction with a lifelong white classmate in high school or college. My children have. My great-grandchildren think this race stuff is nonsense. And one of them said facetiously, when you dinosaurs are gone, the rest of us are going to evolve into a better species. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher brought me here. The people of Oklahoma became like a song to me. The first time that I saw my students, a voice within me said, my love. After 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, been here 50 years now. The last job offer that I turned down was the University of Minnesota. They wanted me to be the senior vice president in charge of the university community. I would be in charge of athletics and student affairs and a lot of other things. And my children, when they found out that I was serious about at least going there, they said, Dad, you can go, but we're going to keep the house here and you can come visit us. Well, I said, no, that's not going to work. As a family, we have to decide. They said, okay, Dad, democracy, let's vote. I wasn't going to go anyway. I gave them the pleasure of thinking that they indeed voted me down. I told the president of the University of Minnesota that I wasn't going to come because this was our 3rd conversation with them. And he said, before you close this out, here's the contract. The salary line was blank. He said, fill it in. I almost peed in my pants. My right hand was shaking. I reached for the pen. My left hand says, nah, not going. And I said, no, thank you. He said, why would you turn down the University of Minnesota, a Big Ten, top tier university, and stay at that 2nd tier University. He went on and on and on, and finally, after he had given me all the positives about Oklahoma and the University of Oklahoma, I said, no disrespect to you, Mr. President, but if Oklahoma is so bad, why are you recruiting me? I knew then that I was an Okie. Nobody talks about us that way. Heroes are individuals sometimes who voluntarily do it and sometimes involuntarily do it because the Creator said, this is your mission. I was that latter. I'm glad. I could not have written a better script for myself. Black history always reminds me. In the Henderson Tulsa Cultural Center, there are two wings. The north wing is the Tulsa wing, and the south wing is the Henderson wing. And there's a mural of me in my room, and there's a mural of Melvin Tolson in his. Beneath my portrait is this saying, and I truly believe it: the only race of any significance is the human race. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher and all of the other people that I met here in Oklahoma taught me to live what I say that I'm teaching and believe in at the university. When you think about us, always remember that there are hundreds of people who sacrifice for us to be here to talk to you. I always close my comments with the classes that I have, and I tell my students the first day, I just want you to try your best, do the best that you can in this class. And then just to get their attention, I say you have the right to succeed or fail. I'll support either of them. I've got their attention, and I say, but the bottom line is simply this: we're a community, we're a family. If we don't have one another, we have nothing of importance. So whatever we say and do here prepares us for what we're going to do out there. Let's find a way to be like this and stop being like this. And that's not that important. This is Oklahoma. Black history reminds us, as Langston Hughes wrote, I too am America. Thank you.
We'd like to open it up to some questions if anyone would like to simply raise your hand. Ms. Anthony?
Could you reflect, either one of you, both of you, reflect on the current state of race relations in the administration, some of the discussions that are going on now, that maybe under the heading of one step forward, two steps back, or two steps forward, one step back?
I remember when times were much tougher than now. I don't see that strange fruit, black bodies hanging from trees. I don't see mobs burning houses, entire communities. I don't see Tulsa 1921. I don't see mass overt hatred spilling over into destruction. It's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. But we shall overcome, as we say. We're the resistance now. And we will do it nonviolently, but we will overcome. If I didn't believe that, I would have no reason to get up in the morning. I don't have much energy to waste thinking negative thoughts, because that energy means that I can't be thinking positive thoughts. So what I'm thinking about now is the next move to counter. It's a chess game now. We haven't been checkmated. We're just making moves now. If the system works, and I believe it's going to work, the courts, legislators, and that other body, we're wrestling now for the soul of a nation. And I believe Martin when he said that truth will out, and fairness will triumph, and justice will roll down like waters. I believe that. I think we're on the right side of history. We're on the right side of humanity. Or as my friend Martin, he said, I don't know where I got this. And he would always share this little poem. We ain't what we want to be. We ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we're going to be, but thank God we ain't what we was. We will never go back to being what we was as a nation. So in answer to your question, I'm a realist, but I'm also a pragmatist, and I love the challenge. I believe that there are enough well-meaning people to counter almost any challenge in terms of rolling back the rights that we've gained. That's just my belief.
Enough said.
Let me just, since do you have enough, no more questions? Let me just share this with you. My first class at the University of Oklahoma was a class of 250 students. Only 2 of them were visibly minorities. So roughly, almost all of my class was white. And they wanted to talk about black power. They could understand white power, chartreuse power, green power, but they couldn't understand black power. I tried explaining it profoundly. I talked about anticipatory socialization, relative deprivation. Oh, I was really great. But they sat there and said, we still don't understand black power. I looked at the 250 faces and I said, you know, class, at the end of the semester, I give you your final grade. That is black power. Thank you.